Yes, so today we're having our first session of the Atlas Space Africa for a discussion which is going to be on an important topic which I'll be handing over to our moderator and then our speaker as we go forward. We all know what has happened in the few months ago whereby AIDS and other opportunities from the United States has been cut for Africans. Yeah, so the recent closure of USAID and the YALI Regional Leadership Center has left a significant gap in Africa's development landscape because the YALI program has its own impacts on Africans, as well as USAID funding opportunities also have their own impact for Africans. So it affected vital sectors such as health, education, food security, among others. While this presents real challenges, it is also a defining moment for us as Africans, especially the young ones like you and me, to reimagine our future beyond the aid dependencies that our fathers and also our leaders depended on. At Atlas Space Africa, we believe that true transformation will come when we shift from relying on foreign aid to building homegrown solutions, on regional collaborations, because it has been created for us that we have barriers between our countries, though we are all in Africa, but there are barriers of trade and other stuffs, which makes things very difficult for many of us as youths. So we want to have something sustainable investment models that will strengthen our reliance as one African people. So the webinar from aid dependency to self-sufficiency, which is a new development model for Africa, is not just a discussion. It is a call to action, a call for us to think boldly, to innovate, and to take ownership of Africa's development journey. I want to encourage us all to engage fully, share our ideas, and let us collectively chart a path where Africa thrives, not on aid, but on self-sufficiency, leadership, and shared prosperity. Thank you for being part of this journey, and I would call on our moderator to begin. Thank you. But before then, please, I didn't share the screen because I'm just speaking this off test, not on a recorded test. That's why, please. Thank you. So I'll call on our moderator to begin the session, please.
That it again generates conversations beyond this conversation, that it really generates conversations that will help us come up with like solutions to some of our own challenges, the challenge that we have as Africans, even amid this closure of the USAID. And to everyone, my name is Intende Baker, and I am a Mandela Fellow, and I'm very passionate about digital inclusion and community empowerment. And like the organizer of this meeting said, the conversation is not just that for the sake of us catching up, but it's very timely and urgent. The closure of the USAID has left a significant void in the funding across several sectors, from health to education to food security, to many things that we really hold dear to our hearts. But does this mean we stop doing those things? And then isn't this a time for us to rethink how we collaborate as young people, Africans, and that are addressing challenges within our communities? James, I'm happy to again host you, and I'm going to give you a few minutes just for you to introduce yourself to us, and then we shall dive deep into the conversation right now. Over to you, James.
Okay. Can you all hear me? Good afternoon, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Can you hear me? Am I loud enough?
Yes, you're loud enough.
Okay. So I'm very excited to be, I believe, the first speaker on this program, and I want to thank the organizer for hosting such a webinar. quite very stimulating. And this conversation seeks to unpack a lot of things about us as Africans, particularly young leaders. And I hope that I can be able to share my thoughts on some of the most trending issues in development, particularly the shutdown of USAID and its potential impact on critical sectors in Africa, as you mentioned, sectors such as health, education, and food security. But what I would do as part of this conversation is to give a little background of the global aid regime, how it all began, and how the concept of aid was later translated in several developing countries across the world, particularly in Africa. So I hope that this conversation would generate new debates, would spark new insights, and would seek to engender the kind of change that young leaders like us actually desire for the better of our continent and our individual communities that we serve. So I'm really looking forward to a very wonderful conversation, wonderful interaction, and I'm excited.
Perfect. Thank you, James. And I hope that again, through my moderation and guidance, you shall be able to actually share all that you've mentioned of and that you prepared for us. But first things first, we are hosting you here as the main speaker, but I'm also going to give an opportunity for the people in the audience to participate at some point. And I'm going to request that you all keep your microphones muted, just in case you're able to speak. I will ask you to unmute. James, what is that history that you talked about? What are the roots of dependency? And as you discuss that, tell us about the current realities of this aid right now, in general, even outside USAID and all that. Tell us the history of aid as you talked about it, and then the current realities right now. How is it like in your perspective?
Well, thank you, Becca. So there's something that a lot of us Africans need to know. The reality of aid, the concept of aid was first introduced somewhere around 1948. So you recall that by 1945, World War II had ended. But I will go back to World War One. During World War One, the United States wasn't a major player. The United States did not participate in World War One. The United States had a what we call isolationism. That was the approach that the United States employed because the U.S. had gained independence in 1776. So by the time of World War One, the United States was pretty much a relatively young nation state, still grappling with its own internal, contradictions and its internal issues. So by virtue of that internal contradictions it had, remember the original 13 states that later formed the Confederation of States and later the United States. So there were a couple of political, social, and economic issues that the United States was grappling with. So it did not participate. It isolated itself from World War One. So by World War II, the United States became involved through the Pearl Harbor, which we all know about. The harbor. So by the end of World War One, by the end of World War II in 1945, the United States sought to get involved into global politics. The United States began to project its hegemonic dominance across the world. So there were two foreign instruments that the United States employed during that period. One was the Marshall Plan, which was promulgated in 1948, and then the Harry Truman Doctrine, So the Marshall Plan was basically intended to revive and rebuild economies, European economies, in Eastern Europe, fractured as a result of the war. And that set the tone for the aid regime for Irena. So the Marshall Plan had two main objectives. It was political, and it also had an economic. So the political nature of the Marshall Plan was to contain Soviet Union. The Eastern Europe, as you all know, Russia or the Soviet Union was the most powerful entity. And the Soviet Union employ and use occupation and expansion, encroachment as part of its approach to gain power. And so the Marshall Plan sought to contain USSR, contain communism, and it also sought to project America's own ideal, what is now considered democracy. So that was the objective of the Marshall Plan. So fast forward by 1949, thereabout, we began to see the rise in what we call Bretton Woods institutions. Bretton Woods institutions like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and other liberal institutions began to emerge as a result of this. So the fundamental objective of these institutions was to contribute in revitalizing countries, states that were considered or that I consider underdeveloped or developing. So that is the entire history of aid, and that is how aid metamorphosed into different streams, into different layers, and aid began to have different preconditions and conditionalities and all of that. But the overarching objective of aid is not region on sustainability, real sustainability. The aid does not address issues. Aid is fundamental issues. Aid compound. Aid does specific and structural issues. So that is why in recent period, people like myself, I'm beginning to argue that people like myself, people like Dambisa Moyo and others are arguing that aid is a dead aid. Aid has conditionality, which oftentimes in Africa fall within the trap. And most times, if we are not careful, we become so much aid dependent to the extent that we become hugely indebted to coal states, to developed states. So it's the case with most African countries. Borrowing is one aspect of aid. Rent. These are all aspects of aid, and all of the different aid components have conditionality, which oftentimes can be detrimental to the African countries in neutrality. So the current reality now is that Africa is hugely indebted to most of the developed countries across the world. Say, for example, East Africa. Let's take East Africa as a case in point. Kenya, for example. Kenya is hugely China. Uganda is also very hugely indebted. The railroads that are being constructed in Mombasa, the flyovers that are being constructed in most African countries are as a result of aid and grants that are being given by other developed countries. And those grants have conditionality. I understand that there are some countries in the developing, in sub-Saharan Africa, where China is practically controlling a very significant part of their government, their airports and the railroads. So these are some of the challenges and issues that is often come along with. And so the current reality is that the world is now, particularly the United States, is now beginning to rethink its foreign policy objectives. his foreign policy construct. With the advent of Donald Trump is looking at the world from a more, I don't want to say from an equal lens, because in the realm of global politics, there's absolutely nothing called equality. Equality exists only in theory, or in practice. No. So he's looking at the world now, he's drifting away from aid to trade. So he's not arguing that aid, of course, we've invested billions and billions of dollars. It's time that we drift away from the reality of trade so that there can be a win-win situation. So that is the current reality. And all of us are now witnessing the shutdown of USAID. USAID no longer exists. Other European states like the EU is now cutting down on aid. They are now more focused on building their own internal capacity. There are conversations on our way for all NATO member states to give at least 5% of their GDP, strengthening their military capability. EU is fighting with the whole thing about migration, internal, external migration, security, the Russian war on the other, Israel other. So there are complex of global issues now that other countries are now dealing with, for which aid is now beginning to be a conversation of the past. So this brings us now to a conversation about what can we do as Africans, given that we understand the trajectory of aid, we understand the history of aid. We know aid has really not solved some structural issues, systemic issues that we've had for years. What now can we do? Hold our hands and still complain and still seek and still look for the white savior from the United States or from Europe? Or do we utilize our competitive advantage? So I think this is what this entire conversation is about. And
Exactly. That's where we are going to be going, even in our conversation. And I've had so many people, especially during the shutdown of the USAID, many people are saying, no, we can survive without aid. Then others were saying it's going to cause the collapse of like many African countries that have been depending on aid to like sustain their like education sector, health sector, and all that. And for me, just out of curiosity, again, just from your lessons, James, from your experience, are there any kind of examples of self-sufficiency actions that are being taken, like maybe say Liberia or countries that are close to you, or just those that you know of that were affected by this closure of the USAID? Are there any examples of self-sufficiency actions that they're taking in response to that you think would give us hope as Africans to believe in our own solutions?
Well, it's a difficult thing to say. For me, I think it isn't a yes or no answer. But what I would say is that, like you already know, most African countries are still suffering what I call colonial hangovers. You know, most of us were colonized, and our colonial masters still have their imprints on our development agenda, on our education, and everything you can imagine. So over time, we've gotten so complacent. I'm saying generally as Africans, over time, we've gotten so complacent. We've gotten so relaxed, and we've gotten so accustomed to aid. So imagine the aid regime in 40. So from 1948 to 2000, you can imagine how many years we're talking about. You can imagine generations upon generations. I've gotten accustomed to aid. I've gotten some national funding, aspect of their development. For instance, USA funding health sector. USAID was funding ID in the health sector. USAID was providing free education. USAID was providing contraceptives. USAID was providing medication for HIV and AIDS. So that burden was on USAID. In the education sector, USAID was also into teachers training, into curriculum, etc., etc. At the same time, USAID was funding almost 15% of our national budget. So every time our government went to draft the national budget or to draft what we for the national development plan, they always had a component of it focused on USAID, they call it foreign partner aid, foreign partner support, foreign partner aid. So all of a sudden, USAID no more, so it comes as a shock. So African governments are now, like the way you get used to doing something over and over, and suddenly that thing is no more. It takes you longer period to that reflect that and that balance. What's happening now to with African governments. But I see in neighboring countries like I see they're drifting more to economic diversification, which is very good enough. I see Cote d'Ivoire is making maximum use of its human resource capacity, of its natural resource capacity. I see that the government in Cote d'Ivoire is investing now into agriculture, investing into education. These are two critical sectors. And so they are using proceeds. I think a certain percent from the agriculture sector is now going to fund the health sector, so as to compensate for USAID drawdown. Something that I think that is a great idea. But on the overall, I see African governments are engaging more into soft cooperation. I see the ECOWAS, for example, in the West African region. If you're from West Africa, you know what ECOWAS is. I see the economy of West African states, ECOWAS, is getting stronger by the day. They're having a couple of meetings. They have this big agenda again. It's another thing to have all of these big agendas, to have these very wonderful conversations and nice projections. And it's entirely a different thing to put those projections to work.
Yeah.
But the mere fact that conversations are all, the mere fact that these on which the African government are and to strengthen soft. And when I mean soft cooperation, free trade, like Liberia can trade easily with Ghana, trade with and I also see that African getting away with this visa restriction. In Kenya, for example, it was or two that once you are an African citizen, you don't need. I have a similar thing about Uganda also working. So these visa restrictions so ability to trade with one another. Under these different visa restrictions, I've been with all these different restrictions, travel restrictions, laid to rest. It is open African trade. It is corridor. It's an avenue to our relations trade and and as part of the sufficient model, I think we will now have to domestic resource mobilization. And I find this is very, very some time ago I was studying. I realized that Liberia alone, our national budget is around 800 million. Our national budget is 800 million. Our government takes across the world speaking of foreign assistance. But I was just thinking to myself, why if we strengthen service delivery institutions? For example, there's absolutely no Liberian who doesn't want it. There's absolutely no one who doesn't want to have pub-borne water, safe drinking water in their homes. What if we strengthen these different services? What if we ensure that every minimum condition on real estate? There are different strategies we can employ and estate. So we lost as a country, we lost over 800, we lost over, the data shows that we lost over at least 400 million annual. These are monies, right? All we need to do as a country is the right measure. So it's the case with most African. We have the potential, we have the ability to raise domestic resources, but we abandon these. We abandon the potential to raise domestic resources, and we go out there begging for aid. For example, Uganda. Think about the number of people in Kampala. Think about the number of people who are in other areas who need services. Of course, they're going to pay for these services. But what about us thinking about that? What if we put in some uh, some transparency and accountability measures in corruption? Corruption, as you all know, is a sink. It absorbs. It takes away. Most African countries lose billions and billions of dollars to corruption annually. But if we strengthen anti-graft institutions, transparency institutions, and make sure that we penalize people who steal from public covers. These are some of the ways we can be able to sustain ourselves. What about investing also into human resources? Studies have shown that countries across the world have done that. Singapore is a classic case in point. Singapore is where it is today because of the number of educated people it has, how it has been able to harness the capacity of those people. So the power of a nation is necessarily not the size of its military. Power of a nation is in its human resource capacity and how well that country is able to harness, to utilize human resource capacity. So just talking about human resource capacity and population, Africa has around 1.5 billion human beings as of 2024. This makes Africa the second most populous continent on the face of the earth. Our growth fertility rate is around 4.1 births per woman. What that means is that on average, each African woman will have at least 4 to 5 children on average. So our population is projected to rise at almost 3.8 billion by 2100. So what this tells, and we have the youngest population in the world. Africa has the youngest population in the world. Not only does we have the youngest population in the world, but we have what the World Economic Forum considers as untapped natural resources. We have some of the most critical natural resources that are demanded. So as part of our approach to self-sufficiency, let's look at all of these advantages we have. Let's look at all of these prospects we have. Let's highlight these prospects. Let's negotiate from a point of, from an advantageous point. We have the youngest population in the world. We have critical natural resources. We have everything we need to become self-sufficient. So let's use that as our advantage, other than going to beg for aid, beg for grant, which oftentimes are not sustainable. So these are like a few self-sufficiency module that I would like to propose that we Africans can begin to use, economic diversification, ensure that we I'm very intentional about where I can travel from here to Kenya. I need to travel from here to Uganda, treat as an ordinary. We can amongst and between domestic resource mobility. And also we could also use to become self-sufficient. And maybe the last one that I also want to talk about, which most times we don't take into annually in Liberia, USAID spent 500 million, and most of money, most of the money go to, of course, USAID does not directly grant, so USAID will have an NGO that will manage the money. Then that American NGO will put up a call for proposal. Then local NGOs will now apply. So the money technically will be managed by an American organization. So in that American organization, you will have the chief of party will be an American, deputy chief of party most times. Then on that project, you will have consultants. You have communication consultants, M&E specialists. All of these people will be people from the US. So some of these consultants earn around $15,000 per month. Meanwhile, the USAID will say that we are spending 500 million. But if you clearly investigate that, you realize almost 40% of that amount goes back to the United States. On the thing of the consultancy, people parties, and if you are a grantee, like a sub-grantee, with the ID project, you are under obligation to purchase all of the project materials of the US institution.
All right.
So are you in the reverse? So technically, the money goes back in the US economy. So it appears like we are giving you an aid. It appears like we are giving you, but in actuality, we're not being developed. The money goes back. So this leaves a whole. This is not sustainable at all. So what is sustainable? That's a structural reform economic issue. And that's something that all of us young Africans need to begin thinking about.
All right. So, James, I'm going to cut you just a little bit. We have about 10 minutes only, and I have really a few things I also wanted us to tackle here. But just following up on that, I'm just going to ask this question, and I want you to give me just 2 responses without really explaining them. What policy shift do you think are needed to support self-sufficiency actions, all these actions that we are trying to take as African countries? What are some of those? Just give me 2 policy shifts that you think are needed to be able to support these actions.
Well, 2 things I would think about. So it will also depend. It will also vary from our different countries. But I think government needs to protect. Government needs to institute laws and policies that citizens who are involved into entrepreneurship, into innovative activity. So in Liberia, we have what we call the Liberianization policy. So that policy basically says Liberians are supposed to do certain businesses. In Uganda, there should be laws that also protect social entrepreneurship, and government should also have funding to be able to support institutions like yours. So I think with these and supporting SMEs will also help too, because these SMEs are more like the economic multipliers. So SMEs have to be supported, the ones that are grown by national of those countries.
Yeah. I think this is one question that I also wanted to ask before we really went deep into the conversation. But and again, I know that you hinted a little bit about it, but what are some of the hidden long-term aid dependency? What are some of the hidden costs of long-term aid dependency for us as Africans, as young leaders? What are some of those things that we should look out for and be sure that these are hidden costs of the dependence that we are enjoying right now, or the dependence that we just enjoyed a few years back before the aid was cut? Yeah. And are these things
So,
that we should still be worried about, even with this funding shift and the aid shift that is happening right now?
so we should all be worried about any kind of funding or support that has preconditions. Any funding opportunity that has preconditions, something to be worried about. And it is a soft power strategy. So in politics, international politics, we have what we call hard power, soft power, and smart power. So it is a soft power. So it's one way that these developed countries, one strategy developed countries use to coerce you to doing something. So we should be watchful about any kind of support that is tailored towards, in a way, making you to do what you otherwise would not do. Now, Africa is having a conversation about the rights of LGBTQ and all those things. Those conversations did not just abruptly come about. This conversation started in different corners, in ballrooms and conferences. I remember a few years ago, Uganda was, I think, seeking some funding assistance from the IMF. And I think while that conversation was ongoing, President Yoweri Museveni made a statement, that was homophobic. And so I later, in less than a week, the IMF issued a statement that they were putting the freeze on the funding to the Ugandan government. I think you remember that very well. You were Ugandan, but I followed that. So these are things that we should be watchful of. And like I said, most African countries still suffer the colonial hangover. So we still see the white man as the savior, as we would say, the white savior. So we believe that nothing significant can happen in our countries if we don't have the involvement of the white man. So we should also be watchful of these different trends. We should now begin to leave this colonial hangover and begin to think ourselves, think our own development. Because honestly, the white man will not develop their country. No one will do for you what you're not capable of doing for yourself. That's just simple. And so I don't know whether my response answers your question, but I think we have to be very watchful for any aid that has preconditions, and especially the preconditions that are totally alum.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you, James. Thank you so much, James. And then for us as young people, how how can our initiatives, how can our work contribute to the Africa that is not aid dependent? Like, how do you see our initiatives and how do we scale such initiatives? I might ask.
Well, so while we are addressing aid issues on the system level, we should also begin to talk about aid issues from the macro level, the MR level. So talking about individuals like you and myself, um, the same way that countries will begin to engage in tough cooperation, we could also begin doing things. Now, the the resources that you need to expand your venture, the resources that you need in order to become self-sufficient are basically not unnecessary not money. What you need is the education, the willpower, and your ability to form collaboration, your ability to identify problems and propose solutions. That is what you need. Now, when you talk to entrepreneurs across the world, one of the things we always tell you is that in scaling a business, a venture, your primary concentration should not be on money. Your primary concentration should be on solving problems, identifying problems and solving those problems. And of course, attracting individuals who buy into your vision. So what about us thinking about collaboration across our different borders? Now that you are educated, you have a certain kind of innovation, you have a certain problem you want to solve. And Africa's problems are almost the same. Across, I've been to many African countries, our problems are almost the same. Our issues are almost the same. So why if we just build a network of thinkers, innovators, disruptors, and problem solvers? So the same venture that is taking shape in Uganda will be happening in Ghana, be happening in Liberia, be happening in Angola, for example. I know the cultural context will be different, but of course the goal remains the same. So with that, that's how people scale up. Think about people like Tony Ilumilu, who started off his venture just in Nigeria, and right now you have UBA across the whole of Africa. Think about Dangote, for example, who started his business in Nigeria, and now it has scaled up. So when he started, his initial thought was to solve a problem, followed by attracting people, bringing on board people he believed would help him drive his vision. Now the vision is scaled up across different parts of the world, different parts of Africa. So I think we must begin to think that way, and that is the first step to thinking self-sufficiency.
Yeah. All right. And then, James, one last one before we close. I am putting you in charge of Africa, and I am asking you to redesign just one particular like I'm asking you to redesign one aspect of Africa's development model in terms of how we are handling development across. Like you said, most of our problems are like the same. And I imagine the same way we approach some of these issues in Uganda is the same way that Kenya is approaching them, Liberia, Tanzania, Ghana, and all these other countries, Malawi and all that. So if you were to redesign one aspect of our development model, what would that be and why?
So I would focus on using local solutions to local problems. Local solution to local problems. I know this sounds a little abstract. But let's say Liberia, for instance, our staple, our food is rice. But it will amaze you to know that we import rice from China. We import rice from China and Pakistan. And this has been ongoing now for over 30, 40 years. We've talked about it. So why if we use local solutions to solve the problem that we have? Instead of having imported, curated template to solving Africa's problem. And that has been our problem over time. We go to Africa's Tokyo Summit, all African leaders go there. And Beijing Africa Summit, all the African leaders go there. Turkey Africa Summit, all the African leaders are there. US Africa Democratic Summit, all the African leaders are there. For me, I think that's pretty much a waste of time and waste of resources. The problem in China would not be the same problem as in Uganda. You go to China, you spend thousands of dollars in hotel on DSA. People are eating, they're taking pictures. They come back to Uganda, the problems are just the same. So why don't we as Africans have our own development model? We already know what the problems are. Why don't we use local solutions to the local problems we have? So for me, I think that would be a push. And let's define define development in our own context.
Yeah.
Let's define development in our own context. You know, look, China is one of the China has one of the most enviable economic models across the world. China was able to pull over 20 million people out of poverty just within 2 or 3 years, within 5 years period. China was able to pull over 20 million people out of poverty. China did that intentionally. China was intentional about investing into TVET and encouraging its citizens to drift away from, investing their time into leisure activities, into politics, for example. In Africa, we talk a lot of politics. How many of us are into TVET? These are critical sectors of country that can develop the country.
Yeah.
So let's design our education model. Most of us, the curriculum we use in our schools are imported. In Uganda, it's other from Great Britain. In Liberia, it's copied after the United States. And so is the case with most of us. Like I said, we still suffer colonial hangover. So if I were to be placed in charge of Africa's development, say for example, Africa is a country and I'm the president, I will focus more on employing local solutions to local problems.
Thank you. Makes sense. All right. So now I wanted to invite you to we are closing this, and I would like to give you the opportunity, James, for you to share your own final reflections or challenge us, the audience that are listening in. Again, based on what we've really discussed, and I hope that this conversation keeps going, but you can use maybe just a minute or two to just share your final reflections and any other things that you might have wanted to share with us in just 2 minutes, and then challenge us, the audience, to go do better even as we respond to all these side cuts.
Okay. So, like I said, aid has really not done well for Africa. It has what is considered top-down approach. So normally aid is a well-curated template that comes from above down. And most times in this aid conversation, there are limited inputs from local communities. Development priorities, Africa's development priorities are misaligned. So as we say in development studies, he who pays the piper causes the tune. So if I'm giving you the money, I dictate to you what I want to see happen. So it's the case with aid. So most times, our country's priorities will be different from what the aid seeks to address. So we are talking about youth employment, breeding more entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs. The aid could be talking about supporting LGBTQ rights. You see the misalignment? Now, aid is also town-bound. That means the aid runs for a certain period, 5-year period, for example. Some projects are for 5 years. And after that, what happens? So aid does not address structural issues like education, economic reform healthcare. You and I know that structural issues take a long period of time to address, like economic reform, job creations, and all these things take some time. And aid is oftentimes accompanied by massive corruption. And I'm saying this because I have worked for the last 7 years in the development space. I've worked in NGO and I've worked in INGO. I know of some of the things that happen. So most times when you hear, okay, Uganda has received $30 million from the World Bank to do this, don't be too excited. Sometimes out of the 30 million, in actuality, only 10 million will be used on actual projects. The rest goes into consultancy, chief of party salary, purchase of vehicle, and utilities. So don't be too excited, And so the very foundation of aid wasn't actually intended to skill out development, wasn't intended to actually develop the African community or the African state. So as part of that, Africans now like us who should begin to rethink, and we should now think about how we can put more time into collaboration and cooperative on certain entrepreneurial ventures. But more so, we should also think about economic diversification, changing the way we look at it and more on building our internal capability.
Thank you. Thank you so much, James. I really appreciate, and again, just like I mentioned at the start, that I'm really honored to be moderating this conversation. And for everyone that followed, please, thank you so much. This was the very first one, as you can imagine. So there was a lot for us to learn in terms of organizing, in terms of coordinating the conversation, but we hope that it made some sense for you and that you can join in the next one. I'm now going to hand over to Abdulatif to officially close. Thank you so much. Yeah. Abdul, over to you. I don't know if your microphone is having the same challenges that we had, but if you can hear me, please feel free to close the conversation. Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. I'm here and I'm very much grateful to all of us who joined this, because this is an interesting discussion. And before we take our leave, I would want to open the floor if anyone has any question at this moment before I give my final comments, and then we close. So the floor is open now if anyone has any question before we take our leave. Okay, so without any question being mentioned or shown in the chat box, I think I want to say very thank you for each and everyone for joining this session. Our moderator as well as our presenter, Mr. James. This is the very first session of this discussion, and I think we are not going to leave it here. This discussion is recorded, and we'll be sharing the recordings, God willing, by next week, so that other members who couldn't join through their busy schedule, they can also make a good use of it. And I think this is not going to be the end. We're going to have this on monthly basis, but also we're planning to have bi-weekly sessions as well on various topics as well. But this platform is not just for discussions, but it's a platform that we want to see change in Africa. We want to support each other. We want to create opportunities, as well as we want to do something for Africa by Africans and also in Africa. So we are all about Africa, the development of Africa. No matter where you are, the corner you are in Africa, we should be able to make an impact. We should be able to make effective change, and also we should be able to lead the change we want to see. We don't really need to always rely on aid and also others for our goodness. As rightly that James mentioned, we're going to have African summits, we're going to have our developmental summit, then we go to China, we go to other countries for those summits. The atmosphere, the environment, and all that does not suit the problems that we are facing in Africa. Hence, at times when our leaders go for those summits and they come back, we see zero results. So this time we just want to have everything in Africa and do things by Africans and also in the African way. So this session is just the first of many other episodes that will be flowing our way. So let's grace our seats, and then as we love and also we share our ideas. We may also be looking at the next topic to discuss as well. And if anyone is interested in any topic or you have any idea that you want to share, I'm dropping the email address in the chat box so that you just send a mail. Or, okay, let me just drop the WhatsApp number, my personal WhatsApp number. You can just send me a message on WhatsApp, and then we can have you on the next session. This is for all Africans. It's not just limited to a particular country. It's for all. It's for everyone. So we need to make the best out of it. So I'm just dropping the WhatsApp number right away. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a great session. I enjoyed it. Hopefully there'll be a next one soon. Hi, Ntende. How are you?